Mom told a Hell's Angel. That man keeps watching my little girl. His response shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in a small park just outside the town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. The kind of place where parents brought their children to play while the scent of fresh grass drifted through the warm air and distant laughter echoed from the playground. Rachel Miller sat on a weathered wooden bench near the swing set, watching her daughter Lily glide back and forth through the sunlight. Lily was 6 years old, with bright brown hair that danced in the wind each time the swing pushed forward. Her shoes kicked the air with pure excitement, and every few moments she let out a small joyful laugh that made Rachel smile. For Rachel, afternoons like this were rare. Life as a single mother working long hours at a local diner did not leave much room for peaceful moments. But today she had promised Lily that they would spend the afternoon together. No rushing, no work calls, just a few quiet hours at the park. Rachel wrapped her light jacket tighter around herself as she watched Lily. At first, everything felt normal. Children ran across the grass, chasing a bright red ball. A young couple walked their golden retriever along the gravel path. An elderly man fed crumbs to a pair of pigeons near the fountain. It was the kind of peaceful scene that made the world feel safe. But then Rachel noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Across the playground, near the shade of a tall oak tree, stood a man she did not recognize. He was not sitting with anyone. He was not using his phone. He was simply standing there, still and quiet. And his eyes were locked on the swing set. More specifically, his eyes were locked on Lily. At first Rachel tried to brush the feeling away. Maybe he was just watching the children play. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But after several long minutes, the man had not moved. Not once. His gaze never shifted. Not toward the other children. Not toward the path. Only toward Lily. A cold weight settled in Rachel's chest as that familiar instinct began to whisper inside her mind. The instinct every mother knows when something feels wrong. Rachel leaned forward slightly on the bench, pretending to check her phone while she looked again. The man was still there. Still watching. Lily swung higher now, her small voice calling out happily to no one in particular. She had no idea that someone across the playground had been studying her every move. Rachel's heart began to beat a little faster. She scanned the park again, searching for someone who might be with the man. No wife. No child. No friend. Just him. Standing there. Watching. Then Rachel noticed something else. On a bench not far from her, sitting quietly with broad shoulders and a dark leather vest, was a man who looked like he did not belong in a peaceful family park at all. His arms were covered in faded tattoos. A heavy black motorcycle helmet rested beside him. The emblem stitched across the back of his vest showed the unmistakable symbol of a Hell's Angel motorcycle club member. Most people in the park seemed careful not to look at him for too long. But Rachel's eyes drifted toward him again as the uneasiness in her chest grew stronger. Because the stranger near the tree was still staring at her little girl. Rachel Miller kept her eyes on the man beneath the oak tree while pretending to scroll slowly through the screen of her phone. Her fingers moved across the glass without purpose, because her attention was no longer on the device in her hands. Every instinct inside her was now focused on the stranger watching her daughter. The man still had not moved. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his hands buried in the pockets of a gray jacket, even though the afternoon sun was warm enough to make most people remove their coats. His face looked ordinary enough from a distance, but something about the stillness of his posture felt wrong. People at parks shifted their weight, checked their phones, talked with others, or watched their own children. This man simply stood there, unmoving, studying Lily, as if the rest of the park did not exist. Rachel swallowed slowly. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion from long shifts at the diner had made her overly cautious. But as another minute passed, the uneasiness inside her chest only grew stronger. Lily kicked her feet high on the swing and laughed again, completely unaware of the tension building around her. The sound of that laughter made Rachel's heart tighten even more. A mother knows the difference between worry and instinct, and this was instinct. Rachel shifted slightly on the bench so she could see both Lily and the stranger without turning her head too obviously. The man had taken a small step forward now, moving a little closer to the playground equipment. It was not much, only a few feet, but Rachel noticed it immediately. Her pulse quickened. That was when she remembered the biker sitting several yards away. The man with the leather vest had not moved either, but unlike the stranger by the tree, his eyes were calm and observant. He had been watching the park in a slow and steady way, as if nothing around him surprised him anymore. Rachel had noticed people avoiding him earlier. A young father had even guided his son away from the bench where the biker sat. The symbol on the back of the vest had been clear enough that even someone unfamiliar with motorcycle clubs could recognize it. The words Hell's Angels curved above a large winged skull. The sight of it had made Rachel nervous when she first arrived at the park. Now she found herself glancing toward him again. The biker sat with his forearms resting on his knees, his heavy boots planted firmly on the gravel path. The afternoon light caught the edges of the tattoos running along his arms. Despite the rough appearance, there was something strangely controlled about the way he carried himself. Not restless, not aggressive, just watchful. Rachel looked back toward the oak tree. The stranger had moved again. Another small step closer to the swing set. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The distance between the man and Lily was shrinking. She could feel the protective part of her mind beginning to panic, calculating every possible outcome at once. Should she call Lily over immediately? Should she walk over to the swings herself? Should she leave the park entirely? But each option felt sudden and obvious, and Rachel did not want to alert the stranger that she had noticed him. Her eyes drifted again toward the biker. He was still there, sitting quietly, his gaze now resting somewhere across the playground. Rachel could not tell if he had noticed the same thing she had. For a moment she hesitated. The idea of approaching a Hell's Angel member felt almost as frightening as confronting the stranger herself. Yet when she looked back toward the oak tree and saw the man staring again at her daughter, the decision inside her mind began to form. Because right now there was only one person in the park who looked like someone others might think twice about crossing. Rachel took a slow breath, stood from the bench, and glanced once more at Lily swinging happily in the afternoon sun before she began walking carefully toward the biker with the leather vest. Rachel Miller slowed her steps as she approached the biker sitting on the bench, her heart beating harder with every foot of gravel she crossed. Up close the man looked even larger than she first thought. His shoulders were broad, his arms thick with muscle beneath faded tattoos that told stories Rachel could not begin to understand. The leather vest he wore was worn and weathered, as if it had traveled thousands of miles beneath open skies and long highways. The winged skull emblem on the back had looked intimidating from a distance, but now that she stood near him, she noticed something else. The man was not tense. He was not aggressive. He simply sat there with the quiet patience of someone who had learned how to read the world without speaking much. For a moment Rachel hesitated. She wondered if this was a terrible idea. The last thing she wanted was to cause trouble in a peaceful park filled with families and children. But when she glanced over her shoulder and saw the stranger near the oak tree still watching Lily, the fear inside her pushed her forward. Rachel cleared her throat softly. The biker lifted his head slightly, dark eyes meeting hers with calm curiosity. They were the eyes of someone who noticed everything but reacted to very little. Rachel forced herself to speak. "Excuse me," she said quietly. The man did not answer right away. He simply looked at her. For a second longer, as if measuring the seriousness in her voice. Up close she could see faint lines across his face that spoke of long years and harder roads. Finally he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Something wrong?" Rachel nodded once and glanced back toward the swing set. "My daughter is over there on the swings," she said. "The little girl with the brown hair." The biker followed her gaze without moving his body, only turning his head slightly toward the playground. Rachel continued, her voice quieter now. "There is a man standing near the oak tree across the playground. He has been watching her for a long time." The biker eyes shifted slowly toward the tree Rachel had pointed out earlier. From where they stood, the stranger was still visible between the branches, his posture stiff and unmoving. For several seconds the biker said nothing. Rachel could not tell what he was thinking, and the silence made her nervous. "I might be wrong," she added quickly. "Maybe it is nothing, but something about the way he keeps looking at her does not feel right." The biker continued watching the man across the park. The wind rustled gently through the leaves above them, carrying the distant sound of children laughing and the squeak of the swing chains. After a moment, he finally asked one simple question. How long? Rachel answered immediately. At least 10 minutes. Maybe more. The biker nodded once, slowly. His gaze returned to Rachel for a brief moment, then back to the stranger by the tree. Rachel followed his line of sight and noticed something that made her stomach tighten again. The man near the oak tree had taken another step forward. He was now closer to the playground fence, just a short walk away from the swings where Lily was still playing happily without a care in the world. Rachel felt her breath catch again. The biker stood up from the bench. The movement was slow and controlled, but the moment he rose to his full height, Rachel realized just how imposing he truly was. He reached down and picked up his motorcycle helmet, setting it carefully on the bench behind him before rolling his shoulders once. For the first time, Rachel heard him speak more than a few words. Stay here, he said calmly. Rachel opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. The biker had already begun walking toward the oak tree, his heavy boots crunching softly across the gravel path as he moved straight toward the man who had been watching her little girl. Rachel Miller stood frozen beside the bench, her hands clenched together as she watched the biker walk across the park. Every step he took seemed calm and deliberate, yet the distance between him and the stranger near the oak tree closed quickly. Around them, the park continued its ordinary afternoon rhythm. Children laughed. A dog barked somewhere along the walking trail. The breeze carried the scent of warm grass and nearby pine trees. But for Rachel, the entire world now felt narrow and tense, as if everything had focused into a single line between the biker and the man watching her daughter. Lily was still swinging happily, her small sneakers kicking forward as she tried to reach higher with each push. She had no idea that anything unusual was happening. Rachel forced herself to stay still just as the biker had told her, though every part of her wanted to run toward the playground and pull Lily into her arms. The biker moved steadily across the gravel path and onto the open grass near the oak tree. The stranger finally noticed him approaching. The man shifted slightly, his shoulders tightening as if he had just realized someone was walking directly toward him. From where Rachel stood, she could see the man glance briefly toward the swings again, then back toward the biker. It was a small movement, but it told Rachel something important. The stranger knew exactly who the biker was walking toward. The biker stopped only a few feet away from him. They stood there facing each other beneath the shade of the tall oak tree. For a moment, neither man spoke. Rachel could not hear their voices from where she stood, but she could see the posture of their bodies clearly. The stranger looked smaller now that someone stood directly in front of him. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing around the park as if suddenly aware that other people were nearby. The biker remained completely still. His arms hung relaxed at his sides, his shoulders square, his eyes locked calmly on the man before him. The silence between them stretched for several seconds. Rachel could feel her heart beating faster with each passing moment. Then the biker finally spoke. Rachel could not hear the exact words, but the tone was low and steady. The stranger frowned slightly, responding with a few quick sentences of his own. From the way his hands moved, Rachel guessed that he was trying to explain something or brush the conversation away. The biker did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned forward slightly and spoke again, this time for a longer moment. Something about those quiet words changed the stranger expression instantly. The man stiffened, his eyes widening just enough for Rachel to notice even from across the park. He glanced again toward the swings where Lily was still playing. Then he looked back at the biker, and for the first time Rachel saw clear nervousness in his face. The stranger shook his head and said something quickly, his voice louder now though still too far away for Rachel to understand. But the biker remained calm. He tilted his head slightly and said one final sentence. Rachel saw the exact moment the words landed. The stranger's face drained of color. His shoulders dropped, and he took one small step backward. Then another. He glanced around the park again, this time not with curiosity, but with the uneasy awareness of someone who had suddenly become the center of attention. The biker still had not moved. He stood in the same place beneath the oak tree, watching the man carefully. Finally, the stranger turned away and began walking quickly toward the far exit path that led out of the park and toward the parking lot. Within seconds, his quick walk turned into a hurried pace as he disappeared down the gravel trail. The biker remained where he was for a moment longer, his eyes following the man until he vanished behind the line of trees. Only then did he slowly turn his head back toward the playground where Lily continued to swing through the bright afternoon sunlight. For a few long seconds Rachel Miller could only stand beside the bench and stare toward the oak tree, trying to understand what had just happened. The stranger who had been watching Lily was gone, disappearing down the gravel path toward the far end of the park, and the biker still stood beneath the branches of the tall tree with the same calm posture he had carried the entire time. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves above him, casting shifting shadows across the grass. From where Rachel stood, he did not look like a man who had just frightened someone away. He looked exactly the same as before. Quiet. Controlled. Watching. Rachel finally released the breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her shoulders dropped slightly as the tight knot in her chest loosened just a little. Across the playground Lily was still laughing, completely unaware of how close something uncomfortable had just come to her peaceful afternoon. The swing chains creaked rhythmically as she pumped her legs forward and back, trying to fly higher with each movement. Rachel felt a rush of relief seeing that carefree joy on her daughter's face. For a moment she considered calling Lily over right away and leaving the park altogether, but the situation had shifted. The stranger was gone, and the biker who had stepped in had not created a scene or raised his voice. Whatever he had said had been enough to send the man walking away without any argument. Rachel watched as the biker turned slowly away from the oak tree and began walking back across the grass toward the benches. His pace was unhurried, the same calm stride he had shown earlier. As he approached, Rachel could see that his expression had not changed much. There was no sign of anger or triumph on his face. If anything, he looked mildly thoughtful, as if he had simply handled a routine problem and moved on. When he reached the gravel path, he stopped a few feet away from Rachel. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel realized she was still gripping the strap of her purse tightly. She forced her fingers to relax. "Thank you," she said quietly. The biker glanced toward the playground first, making sure Lily was still safely on the swing. Then he looked back at Rachel. His eyes were steady and direct, but not unfriendly. He nodded once. "You were right to say something," he replied in a low voice. Rachel hesitated before asking the question that had been building in her mind. "What did you say to him?" The biker looked toward the far trail where the stranger had disappeared. His expression remained calm. "I asked him why he was watching a little girl who was not his daughter," he said. Rachel felt another chill pass through her chest just hearing the words spoken out loud. The biker continued. "Then I told him that everyone in the park could see him now." Rachel frowned slightly, confused. "That is all." The biker gave a small shrug. "Men like that do not like attention." Rachel followed his gaze across the park again. The gravel path at the far end was empty now. Whoever the man had been, he was clearly gone. The biker stepped past Rachel and picked up his motorcycle helmet from the bench where he had left it earlier. He rested it under one arm. Rachel watched him carefully for another moment before speaking again. "My name is Rachel," she said. The biker nodded once more. "Ethan," he replied simply. Rachel looked back toward the swing set again. Lily was slowing down now, her small feet brushing the ground as she prepared to hop off the swing. The normal sounds of the park continued around them, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. But Rachel knew that something important had changed. Because for the first time since she noticed that stranger near the oak tree, the uneasy feeling in her chest had finally begun to fade. Rachel Miller watched Lily hop down from the swing and brush a few strands of hair away from her face before running across the soft grass toward the bench where Rachel and Ethan stood. The little girl moved with the carefree energy only children seem to have, her small sneakers thudding lightly against the ground as she hurried over. Rachel felt another wave of relief seeing her daughter safe and smiling. For a moment the tension from earlier felt distant, almost unreal, as if it had been nothing more than a passing shadow across an otherwise peaceful afternoon. Lily reached the bench and wrapped her arms around Rachel's waist. "Mom, did you see how high I went?" she said excitedly. "I almost touched the sky." Rachel smiled and placed a gentle hand on Lily's head, smoothing down the strands of brown hair that the wind had tossed around. "I saw you, sweetheart," she replied softly. "You were flying pretty high out there." Lily beamed proudly before noticing the tall man standing nearby. She tilted her head slightly as children often did when meeting someone new. Her curious eyes traveled from Ethan's boots up to the leather vest and the tattoos along his arms. Rachel instinctively placed a protective arm around Lily's shoulders, though the gesture was gentle rather than fearful now. "Lily, this is Ethan," Rachel said. "He helped us a moment ago." Lily looked up at Ethan with open curiosity. Ethan looked down at the little girl for a brief moment, and something subtle in his expression shifted. The hard lines in his face softened just slightly. "Hello there," he said in the same calm voice he had used earlier. Lily gave a small wave. "Hi." Rachel watched the exchange carefully. She had expected Ethan to seem uncomfortable around a child, but instead he simply nodded politely, as if greeting anyone else in the park. After a moment, he looked back toward the gravel trail where the stranger had disappeared. Rachel noticed the movement. "Do you think he will come back?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head once. "No." His answer was simple but confident. Rachel followed his gaze across the park again. The path remained empty. The tension that had once filled the space beneath the oak tree was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a normal afternoon. A group of teenagers walked past carrying basketballs. A mother pushed a stroller along the path near the fountain. The world had resumed its usual rhythm. Lily tugged gently at Rachel's sleeve. "Mom, can I go on the slide now?" Rachel hesitated for a moment. The protective instinct inside her had not disappeared entirely, but she also knew she could not keep Lily hidden away every time something uneasy happened. She glanced toward Ethan once more. He had not moved, but his eyes continued scanning the park with the same quiet awareness he had shown earlier. Rachel finally nodded. "Stay where I can see you, okay?" Lily grinned and ran toward the playground equipment again, heading straight for the tall blue slide near the swings. Rachel watched her carefully until she reached the ladder and began climbing. Only then did she turn back to Ethan. "I really appreciate what you did," she said sincerely. "Most people probably would have ignored it." Ethan shrugged slightly. "People notice things more than they admit," he said. "They just hope someone else will handle it." Rachel considered those words. The simplicity of them carried a truth she had seen many times in everyday life. After a short silence, she asked another question that had been forming in her mind. "How did you know he would leave just because you talked to him?" Ethan looked toward the playground again, where Lily had reached the top of the slide. "Sometimes people who are doing the wrong thing depend on nobody confronting them," he replied calmly. "When someone does, they realize they are no longer invisible." Rachel watched Lily slide down with a joyful laugh. The uneasy feeling in her chest had nearly faded completely now, replaced with something else. A quiet sense of gratitude toward the quiet biker who had chosen not to look away. Rachel Miller rested her hands lightly on the back of the wooden bench while watching Lily run back toward the slide again, her small sneakers kicking up tiny bursts of dust from the playground mulch. The afternoon sun had begun to lower slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows across Cedar Ridge Park, but the warm golden light still made everything feel calm and ordinary. If someone had arrived at the park right now, they would have seen nothing unusual at all. Children playing, parents chatting, a dog chasing a tennis ball near the walking trail. Yet Rachel knew that only minutes earlier something unsettling had been moving quietly beneath that peaceful surface. She glanced again toward the gravel trail where the stranger had disappeared. The path curved behind a cluster of pine trees before leading to the parking lot, and from where she stood there was no sign of him anymore. Ethan remained beside the bench with his motorcycle helmet resting under his arm. He had not returned to sitting yet. Instead, he stood with the same quiet posture, his eyes scanning the park in slow, steady movements as if he were checking that everything had returned to normal. Rachel noticed that his attention moved naturally across the playground equipment, the walking paths, and the tree line along the far side of the park. It was the kind of watchfulness she had seen before in people who had spent years learning how to read situations quickly. Lily climbed the ladder to the slide again and sat at the top, waving down toward her mother with a bright smile. Rachel waved back, trying to keep her own expression relaxed so Lily would not sense any lingering worry. Then Lily pushed herself forward and slid down with another burst of laughter. The sound filled the air, light and carefree. Rachel turned slightly toward Ethan. "You seem pretty certain that man will not come back," she said quietly. Ethan shifted his gaze from the far trail back toward the playground. "When someone realizes people are paying attention to them, they usually leave," he replied. Rachel considered that for a moment. It made sense, yet part of her mind still lingered on the uneasy feeling she had earlier. What if he comes back another day? She asked. Ethan looked toward the oak tree again, the place where the stranger had been standing before. If he does, someone will notice again, he said. Rachel followed his line of sight. The oak tree stood quietly in the breeze, its wide branches casting shade over the grass beneath it. The space where the stranger had stood now looked completely empty, as if nothing had happened there at all. A few seconds passed before Rachel spoke again. You handled that calmly, she said. Most people would have made a bigger scene. Ethan gave a small shrug. Sometimes calm is louder than shouting. Rachel nodded slowly. She could see the truth in that now. The stranger had not been scared away by threats or anger. He had simply realized someone had noticed him and was not afraid to confront him. That alone had been enough. Just then a distant sound rolled faintly across the park. It was the low hum of a vehicle engine approaching along the street near the entrance. Rachel barely noticed it at first, but Ethan's head turned slightly toward the sound. A moment later, the shape of a black police cruiser appeared at the far end of the park road, moving slowly past the entrance sign. The car did not have flashing lights or sirens. It simply turned into the small parking lot beside the walking trail. Rachel frowned slightly as she watched it come to a stop. A uniformed officer stepped out and closed the door behind him. The officer paused for a moment, scanning the park as if looking for someone specific. Rachel felt a flicker of curiosity. Ethan's expression, however, remained unchanged. He simply watched as the officer began walking across the grass toward the benches where they stood. The uniformed officer walked steadily across the grass toward the benches, his dark blue patrol uniform catching the warm afternoon light as he approached. Rachel Miller watched him with quiet curiosity while Lily continued playing at the slide behind them, completely unaware that anything unusual was happening nearby. The officer was a tall man with a calm presence, the kind of posture that suggested years of quiet routine rather than dramatic action. His radio crackled softly at his shoulder as he moved closer. When he reached the gravel path a few feet from the bench, his eyes settled on Ethan. For a brief moment, the officer's expression changed from neutral observation to something more familiar. Well, I will be, the officer said with a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth. Ethan Cole. Ethan did not seem surprised to see him. He gave a small nod of recognition. Afternoon, Mike. Rachel glanced between the two men, slightly surprised by the casual tone of the exchange. The officer stepped closer, resting his hands on his belt as he looked Ethan over with an amused expression. I heard there might be some kind of situation out here, Officer Mike Dawson said. Dispatch got a call from someone walking their dog who thought they saw a guy acting suspicious near the playground. Rachel felt a small chill run through her again as the words suspicious near the playground were spoken out loud. She realized that someone else in the park must have noticed the same strange behavior she had seen earlier. Officer Dawson shifted his attention toward Rachel. Everything all right here, ma'am? Rachel nodded slowly. Yes, I think so. There was a man watching my daughter for a while, she said, glancing toward the playground where Lily was now climbing the ladder again. But Ethan talked to him, and he left. The officer raised an eyebrow slightly and looked back toward Ethan. You talked to him, huh? Ethan shrugged lightly. Asked him what he was doing here. Rachel noticed the officer's expression shift into something closer to understanding. That all you did? Ethan gave a calm nod. That was enough. Officer Dawson let out a quiet breath and glanced toward the oak tree where the stranger had been standing earlier. Did he head toward the south trail? Ethan pointed casually toward the gravel path leading to the parking lot. That way. Officer Dawson followed the direction with his eyes and then nodded slowly. Figures. Rachel felt a growing sense that the situation might be more serious than she first realized. Excuse me, she said carefully. Do you know who that man was? The officer hesitated for a moment before answering. We are not completely certain yet, he said, but we have had a few reports over the past couple of weeks about someone matching that description showing up near playgrounds in neighboring towns. Rachel's stomach tightened. Ethan's expression remained steady, though his eyes shifted briefly toward the playground again, where Lily had just slid down with another burst of laughter. Officer Dawson noticed the glance and nodded approvingly. I had a feeling you might be around when dispatch mentioned the park, he said to Ethan. You always seem to notice these things before anyone else does. Rachel looked at Ethan again, surprised. The officer continued, speaking in a tone that sounded almost respectful. Cedar Ridge has had a few problems in the past with guys who think nobody is paying attention. But word tends to spread pretty quickly when someone like you starts showing up at the same places they do. Ethan did not respond right away. He simply watched the playground for another moment before looking back toward the officer. Just keeping an eye on things, he said quietly. Officer Dawson nodded again. Well, I appreciate it. Rachel stood there absorbing the exchange, realizing that the quiet biker she had approached only minutes earlier was not just a random stranger sitting in the park. In fact, it sounded like the police already knew exactly who he was. Rachel Miller stood quietly beside the wooden bench while Officer Mike Dawson and Ethan Cole finished their brief exchange. The realization that the police officer knew Ethan personally was still settling in her mind. Only a short time earlier she had hesitated to approach the biker at all, unsure whether asking him for help was a good idea. Now the situation felt completely different. Lily laughed again in the background as she climbed the ladder to the slide for another turn, her carefree voice echoing across the playground. Rachel looked toward her daughter for a moment, making sure she was still safe and within sight. When she turned back, Officer Dawson had shifted his attention toward Ethan again. We have been trying to get a clear look at this guy for a while now, the officer said calmly. A few parents reported someone hanging around playgrounds in nearby towns, but every time we showed up the person was already gone. Ethan listened quietly, his expression unchanged. Rachel noticed that he seemed more interested in the playground than in the conversation itself, his eyes drifting occasionally toward the equipment where Lily and several other children were still playing. The officer continued speaking. Dispatch said a woman walking her dog saw someone acting strange near the swings here about 15 minutes ago. She called it in, but by the time I arrived it sounds like the situation had already been handled. Ethan gave a small nod. Rachel felt the need to speak. He was watching my daughter for several minutes before I said anything, she explained. I thought maybe I was imagining it at first, but something felt wrong. Officer Dawson nodded with understanding. A lot of people second-guess themselves in situations like that, he said. The important thing is you trusted your instincts. Rachel glanced briefly toward Ethan again. If he had not been here, she thought, she might have simply grabbed Lily and left the park without ever knowing who that stranger was or why he had been there. The officer turned slightly and looked out across the park, his eyes scanning the open grass and tree line. We will take a drive around the neighborhood and see if we can find him, he said. Sometimes these guys move from one park to another hoping nobody connects the dots. Ethan spoke quietly then. Gray jacket, dark baseball cap, early 40s. The officer nodded immediately. That matches the description from the other reports. Rachel felt the weight of the situation deepen as she listened. This was not just a random, uncomfortable moment at the park. The man she had noticed had apparently been seen before in other places. Officer Dawson rested one hand on his belt and looked back at Ethan. I appreciate you keeping an eye out, he said. You always seem to be in the right place when something like this pops up. Ethan gave a slight shrug as if the comment did not mean much to him. Just passing through, he replied quietly. Rachel found that answer hard to believe. There was something deliberate about the way Ethan watched the park, something that suggested he was not simply passing through at all. The officer noticed Rachel's thoughtful expression and gave her a reassuring smile. You did the right thing speaking up, he said again. And you were lucky Mr. Cole happened to be nearby? Rachel nodded slowly. Lucky was exactly the word she had been thinking. Behind them, Lily reached the bottom of the slide and waved again toward Rachel with a huge grin, clearly proud of her playground adventures. Rachel waved back automatically. The simple normal moment felt almost surreal after everything she had just learned. As Officer Dawson began walking back toward his patrol car, Rachel looked once more at Ethan standing beside the bench. The quiet biker who had stepped in so calmly a short time earlier was no longer just a stranger with a motorcycle vest. Now it was clear that even the local police seemed to trust him to notice the things other people might miss. Rachel Miller remained standing beside the bench for a moment after Officer Mike Dawson walked back toward the patrol car. The officer paused briefly near the gravel path, speaking quietly into the radio clipped to his shoulder before opening the door of the cruiser. The low murmur of his voice carried faintly across the park before the door closed and the engine started again. The patrol car rolled slowly out of the parking lot and disappeared down the street, leaving the peaceful rhythm of the park exactly as it had been before. Rachel watched the empty entrance road for a second longer before turning back toward Ethan Cole. The quiet biker still stood beside the bench with the same calm posture, his motorcycle helmet resting under one arm, while his eyes scanned the playground once more. Lily had moved from the slide back toward the swings again, now laughing with another little girl who had joined her. Their voices floated through the warm air like nothing unusual had ever happened. Rachel exhaled slowly. It was strange how quickly the world could return to normal after something unsettling passed through it. She looked back at Ethan. "The officer seemed to know you pretty well," she said carefully. Ethan shifted his gaze from the playground back toward her. "Small towns are like that," he replied. Dawson had spoken earlier carried a tone of respect, not just casual familiarity. It sounded like Ethan had helped before. Rachel hesitated for a moment before asking the question that had been forming in her mind since the officer arrived. "Do you spend a lot of time watching parks like this?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked again toward the oak tree where the stranger had stood earlier. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the grass. Finally, he spoke in the same quiet tone he had used all afternoon. "Sometimes." Rachel studied his expression. The simple answer suggested something deeper beneath it. It did not sound like a hobby or coincidence. It sounded like a choice. Lily's laughter rang out again as she jumped off the swing and ran toward the climbing bars nearby. Rachel watched her for a moment before speaking again. "The officer said there have been reports of that man in other towns." Ethan nodded slightly. "That is what he said." Rachel folded her arms lightly across her chest. "You sounded like you already suspected something when you walked over there earlier." Ethan looked down briefly at the gravel path beneath his boots before lifting his eyes again. "Sometimes people give themselves away without realizing it," he said. "The way they watch. The way they move." Rachel remembered the moment she had first noticed the stranger standing near the oak tree. The stillness. The focus on Lily. The uncomfortable feeling in her chest that she had almost ignored. "I almost convinced myself it was nothing," she admitted quietly. Ethan gave a small nod of understanding. "Most people do." Rachel looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. She realized that if she had ignored that feeling and said nothing, the stranger might have stayed much longer. Or worse, he might have followed someone out of the park later when nobody was watching. The thought sent another chill through her. Lily suddenly ran back toward the bench again, her cheeks flushed with excitement from playing. "Mom, can we stay a little longer?" she asked eagerly. Rachel smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "We will see, sweetheart," she said gently. Lily glanced curiously at Ethan again before turning back toward the playground. Rachel watched her run off once more, then turned to Ethan. "Whatever brought you here today," she said softly. "I am really glad you were sitting on that bench." Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes remained on the playground, quietly following Lily and the other children as they played beneath the warm Colorado sun. The warm afternoon light stretched across Cedar Ridge Park as Rachel Miller leaned lightly against the wooden bench, watching Lily climb across the metal bars with determined concentration. The other children laughed and ran around her, their voices blending into the gentle rhythm of a peaceful day. The tension from earlier had faded into the background, yet Rachel could still feel a quiet awareness lingering in the air, like the echo of a storm that had passed without anyone else fully noticing. Beside her, Ethan Cole remained standing with the same calm presence he had carried since the beginning. His motorcycle helmet rested against his hip, and his eyes moved slowly across the park as if he were measuring every small detail. Rachel studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You said sometimes people give themselves away by the way they watch," she said thoughtfully. "That sounded like something you learned from experience." Ethan remained quiet for a few seconds. His gaze drifted toward the line of trees at the edge of the park where the gravel trail curved out of sight. The breeze moved softly through the branches, and somewhere nearby a wind chime from a house across the street rang faintly in the distance. Finally Ethan spoke. "I had a younger sister," he said. Rachel did not interrupt. The change in his tone told her this was not an easy subject. She simply listened. "Her name was Megan," Ethan continued quietly. "She loved playgrounds like this." Rachel felt her attention sharpen immediately. Ethan still watched the park while he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that had not been there before. "When we were kids, our mother worked long shifts," he said. "I was supposed to keep an eye on her when we went out. Make sure she stayed safe." Rachel felt a slow tightening in her chest as she listened. Ethan paused briefly, his eyes following Lily as she jumped down from the bars and ran toward the swing set again. One afternoon, he continued, I looked away for a few minutes. Just a few minutes. Rachel already knew where the story was heading before he finished the sentence. When I looked back, she was gone. The sounds of the park seemed to fade slightly as those words settled between them. Rachel felt a quiet sadness move through her. I am sorry, she said gently. Ethan gave a small nod but did not look at her. It took hours before someone found her a few blocks away, he explained. A man had tried to take her. Rachel's breath caught. But she was lucky, Ethan added quickly. Someone saw what was happening and stepped in. Rachel exhaled slowly, relieved by the outcome, yet still shaken by how close it had come. Ethan finally turned his head slightly toward her. That man saved my sister's life, he said. Rachel understood now. The pieces of the afternoon suddenly made sense. The careful watchfulness. The calm confrontation beneath the oak tree. The way Ethan had scanned the playground without drawing attention to himself. After that day, I started noticing things more, Ethan continued quietly. People who linger too long. People who watch the wrong things. Rachel looked out toward the playground again, where Lily was laughing with another child near the swings. It only takes one person paying attention sometimes, she said softly. Ethan nodded once. Exactly. The breeze moved gently through the trees again, and the peaceful sounds of the park slowly returned to Rachel's awareness. But the meaning behind Ethan's presence there that day had become clear. He was not just passing through. He was making sure that if someone like that stranger ever showed up again, there would always be at least one person who noticed. The late afternoon sun drifted lower over Cedar Ridge Park, painting the grass with long golden shadows as Rachel Miller stood quietly beside the wooden bench. Ethan's words about his sister still echoed in her mind. She watched Lily running happily between the swings and the climbing bars, her laughter ringing across the playground with the simple joy only children seemed to carry so naturally. For Rachel, the park looked different now. The same trees and benches and walking paths were still there, but she could see them through a new understanding. Safety was not something that simply existed. It was something created when people chose to pay attention. Ethan Cole stood beside her, his broad shoulders relaxed, but his eyes still moving calmly across the playground. Rachel could see now that his quiet watchfulness was not suspicion or fear. It was responsibility. The kind that came from someone who had once seen how quickly things could go wrong. Lily suddenly ran back toward them again, her cheeks flushed from playing and her small hands slightly dusty from the metal bars. Mom, can I get some water? She asked between breaths. Rachel reached into her bag and handed her a small bottle. Here you go, sweetheart. Lily drank eagerly, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand before noticing Ethan standing nearby again. Her curious eyes studied him for a moment just like earlier, but this time there was no hesitation. Children often sense things in ways adults could not explain, and to Lily the tall man beside the bench no longer seemed strange. He simply seemed like someone who belonged there. She tilted her head slightly. Mr. Ethan, she said in a small voice. Ethan looked down at her. Yes. Lily smiled shyly and reached into the pocket of her little jacket. For a moment Rachel wondered what she was doing. Then Lily pulled out a small sticker sheet that had been folded slightly from being carried around all afternoon. She carefully peeled one of the stickers away. It was a simple bright yellow star with a smiling face. Lily held it up proudly toward Ethan. This is for you, she said. Rachel watched the moment quietly. Ethan looked down at the tiny sticker in Lily's hand as if it were something far more important than it appeared. For a second the hardened expression he usually carried softened again, the same subtle change Rachel had noticed earlier when Lily first greeted him. You were giving that to me, he asked gently. Lily nodded seriously. Because you helped my mom. Ethan slowly crouched down so he was closer to her height. The movement made the leather vest shift slightly across his shoulders as he accepted the small sticker from her hand. Thank you, he said quietly. Lily grinned and ran back toward the playground again, already focused on climbing the ladder to the slide one more time before the day ended. Rachel looked at Ethan and smiled. That might be the most unusual thank you gift you have ever received. Ethan glanced down at the small yellow sticker resting in his large hand. For a moment he seemed to consider it carefully before placing it gently on the side of his motorcycle helmet. It stuck there brightly against the dark surface. Rachel laughed softly at the unexpected sight. "It looks good there," she said. Ethan gave a small nod. "I think so too." Rachel followed his gaze back toward Lily, who was now sliding down the bright blue slide with another burst of laughter. The peaceful scene stretched across the park once again, warm and calm beneath the Colorado sky. But this time Rachel understood something she had not fully realized before. Sometimes the safest place in the world was simply a place where someone like Ethan was quietly watching.